The night Lena Hartwell stitched up the most dangerous man in Vancouver without flinching, she had no idea it would change everything. She had been on her 14th hour of a 16-hour shift when they brought him in. Two men in dark coats, moving too fast for the pace of a normal emergency, half carrying a third between them. The third man was tall, broad enough that the two others strained under his weight, and he was bleeding through a compress that looked like it had once been someone's jacket. The blood was dark, arterial. Lena's brain registered before the rest of her had even processed what she was looking at. She was a second-year nursing student doing her clinical placement at Vancouver General. She was 24 years old. She had $47 in her checking account and a thermos of cold coffee on the nurse's station counter. None of this prepared her for what walked through those doors. "Someone needs to look at him," the shorter of the two men said. His accent was Eastern European, clipped and flat. Not a request. The triage nurse, Pamela, took one look at the wound and reached for the phone. "Standard protocol. Call it in. Get a surgeon." Lena was already pulling on gloves. She didn't know why. Later, she would tell herself it was instinct. The same instinct that had made her the top of her cohort in emergency assessment, that had made her supervising Nurse Adeyemi quietly tell the head of the department that this particular student was not like the others. In the moment, all Lena knew was that the compress was failing, that the man's blood pressure was dropping by the second, and that if someone didn't act in the next 90 seconds, he was going to die on the floor of the waiting room. "Get him on the gurney," she said. Her voice came out steady. That surprised even her. The two men looked at her, this slim woman with dark circles under her eyes, and a stethoscope that still had a coffee stain on the tubing, and for a moment she thought they would laugh, or argue, or push past her to find someone with an MD after their name. They did not laugh. They moved him to the gurney. She worked fast. Clean entry wound, exit wound compromised. The bleeding was from a nicked vessel, not a full laceration, which meant she had a window, a small one. She called it out loud as she worked, not for the men in dark coats, but because that was how she had been taught. Narrate the situation, keep your own mind clear. "You're going to need a vascular surgeon," she told the man on the gurney. He was conscious, barely. His eyes, a pale, unsettling grey, tracked her movements with an attention that was almost clinical. Like he was assessing her, like he was deciding something. "Handle it," he said. His voice was low, roughened by pain, but there was no panic in it, no fear at all. "I'm a nursing student," she said. Not an apology. A fact. Then be a very good one, she was. The surgeon arrived 6 minutes later and finished what she had started. The man, who had given no name, no insurance, no emergency contact, was taken into surgery, and Lena was left standing in the hallway with blood on her gloves, and the quiet certainty that she had just done something she wasn't entirely supposed to do. "Miss Adeyemi found her there. You stabilized him," her supervisor said. Not a question. Yes, a pause. "The charge nurse is going to want a full incident report." "I know." Another pause, longer. "You did the right thing, Lena." She didn't feel like she'd done the right thing. She felt like she'd done the only thing. There was a difference. She finished her shift, went home to her apartment in East Van, the one with the radiator that clicked all night and the neighbor who played guitar badly until 11 and slept for 9 hours straight. She did not think about the grey eyes. She told herself she did not think about them. 3 days passed. On the 4th day, a black car was parked outside her building when she left for her morning shift. She noticed it the way you notice something that is trying not to be noticed. Too still, engine idling, no visible reason to be there. She kept walking. She had a bus to catch and a quiz on pharmacokinetics that she had not finished studying for, and she did not have time to be unsettled by sedans that were probably nothing. The sedan followed her bus. She noticed that too. When she got off at the hospital stop, a man was already there. Not one of the two from that night, a different one, younger, with careful posture and an earpiece that he hadn't bothered to hide. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said. She stopped. "I'm going to be late for my shift. Mr. Devereux would like to speak with you." The name landed with a weight she hadn't expected. Even Lena, who did not pay attention to the kind of news that circulated in certain circles, had heard the name Devereux. You didn't live in Vancouver for long without hearing it. It moved through conversations the way weather moved. Something in the background, always present, capable of turning without warning. Roman Devereux. 41. Head of the Devereux Group, which was either a private equity firm, a logistics company, or something else entirely, depending on who you asked. His name appeared in the business pages occasionally, always briefly, always in contexts that raised more questions than they answered. His photograph appeared almost never. But the man she had stabilized 3 nights ago, with the grey eyes and the voice that gave instructions like someone accustomed to being obeyed, she had already suspected. "I'm going to be late for my shift," she said again. "Your shift has been covered." That was the moment she should have said no. Looking back, she understood that. She was a nursing student with $47 in her checking account and a sensible awareness of self-preservation, and the correct answer was, "I don't know who Mr. Devereux is, and I'm going to walk through those hospital doors right now." She got in the car. It was not a fear thing. It wasn't even really a curiosity thing, though she would claim curiosity later when she needed a more comfortable explanation. The truth was simpler and harder to justify. The man on the gurney had looked at her like she was worth looking at, and she had not been looked like that in a long time. The drive took 40 minutes. They crossed the bridge and moved into West Vancouver, through neighborhoods where the houses grew further apart and the hedges grew taller, until they arrived at a property that didn't look like a house so much as a statement of intent. Stone and glass and carefully managed cedar. A driveway that implied distance. A garden that had been designed to look effortless. She was brought to a sitting room. Clean lines, very little ornamentation, a window that looked out onto the water, and left there. He arrived 10 minutes later. Roman Devereux was fully upright and dressed in what appeared to be a very expensive charcoal suit, which was either impressive or unsettling or both, given that 3 nights ago he had been bleeding through a makeshift compress on a hospital gurney. He moved with a slight adjustment in his left side, favoring the wound unconsciously, but his bearing was immaculate. His eyes, in daylight, were exactly as she remembered. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said. "You're not supposed to be walking around like that," she said, a very small pause. "Excuse me, your wound. 4 days post-surgery. Whatever they did in there is still fragile. You should be resting, not wearing suits and standing in rooms." She had not planned to say any of that. It came out the way most of her professional observations came out, directly, and without a filter she had never quite managed to install. He looked at her for a long moment. Then something changed in his expression. Barely perceptible, like a door opening a centimeter. "Sit down, Miss Hartwell. I'd rather stand, actually. It was a long drive." Another pause. Longer. "As you like." He gestured to the chair anyway, and she decided standing was making a point she didn't actually need to make, so she sat. He sat across from her, in a chair that was angled slightly toward the window, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "I wanted to thank you," he said finally. "What you did was, you don't need to thank me. It's what I'm trained to do. You're a second-year student. I'm aware. What you did was beyond what a second-year student is trained to do." She met his eyes. "Then you're welcome." There it was again, that almost imperceptible shift. She wondered if anyone told him no. She wondered if anyone spoke to him like this, like he was a person rather than a category of person. She suspected, based on very limited evidence and one grey morning in a sitting room with a view of the water, that the answer was rarely. "I'd like to compensate you," he said, "for your time, for the risk you took." "I don't need compensation. I'm not offering it because I think you need it." "Then why are you offering it?" "Because I am accustomed to debts being settled," he said. "It's a character flaw, possibly, but I'm 41 and disinclined to correct it now." She studied him. He was watching her with that same flat, assessing attention from the gurney, and she had the odd sensation that this conversation, her refusal, the way she was looking back at him, instead of looking away, was somehow the answer to a question he had been asking himself. "I don't want your money," she said. But there is something I want. His expression didn't change. Go on a recommendation for the Advanced Trauma Fellowship at St. Paul's. It's extraordinarily competitive. I've applied twice and been waitlisted both times. She paused. I'm very good. I know I'm very good. I just need someone who will be listened to say so. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was evaluative. That's what you want, he said. It wasn't quite a question. That's what I want. Not a check, not a car, not... I have a bus pass and it works fine. I want the fellowship. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you stabilized a critically wounded man with no equipment and no authorization. And the only thing you want in return is someone to tell a medical board you're as good as you know you are. Yes. Why didn't you ask the hospital to do that? Your performance would have been documented. It was documented, she said, and there's an incident report that says I acted outside the scope of my placement. A beat. I'd rather not have that be the primary thing people read. Something crossed his face. Not quite amusement, something more deliberate than that. I'll make the call this afternoon, he said. She stood up. Thank you. You're leaving. You should be resting, Mrs. Hartwell. His voice stopped her at the door. She turned. He was still seated, which meant she was looking down at him for the first time, and somehow that didn't change anything about the way he occupied the room. The incident report will be managed as well. Quietly, she should have argued. She knew that. She was a nursing student who believed in transparency and documentation and doing things correctly even when it was inconvenient. She stood in the doorway for a moment. That one, she said, I'll accept. She left. The recommendation arrived within the week, not as an email or a form letter, but as a personal note on heavy cream paper, signed by Roman Devereux, in a signature that was surprisingly readable, sent directly to the fellowship committee at St. Paul's. She knew because the committee chair, a woman named Dr. Reyes, who had been politely unmoved by both of Lena's previous applications, called her personally 3 days later. We'd like to discuss your application, Dr. Reyes said. Formally. Lena was on the bus. She pressed her thermos against her chest and stared out the window at the wet Vancouver morning and said, I'm available Thursday. She told herself it was over. She had been thanked. She had asked for what she wanted. And it was done. Roman Devereux was a patient she had helped in an emergency, and the world was full of people you helped in emergencies who then moved on, and so did you. She told herself this with some conviction for approximately 3 weeks. Then his daughter arrived at the hospital. Her name was Celia Devereux. She was 20 years old, with her father's grey eyes, and a manner that suggested she had grown up in rooms where everyone deferred to her and had decided this was simply how rooms worked. She arrived not as a patient, but as a donor's representative. The Devereux group had recently given a significant sum to the hospital's cardiac wing, and she was being given a tour by the hospital's director of development, who was trying very hard not to appear flustered. Lena was charting at the nurse's station when Celia and the director rounded the corner. Celia stopped. You're the nursing student, she said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. Factually, the way you might identify a piece of furniture. The one who helped my father. I'm a nursing student, yes, Lena said. Lena Hartwell. My father mentioned you. Lena wasn't sure what to do with that. How is he recovering? He's fine. He doesn't do anything slowly. A pause. Celia was looking at her with an expression that Lena couldn't quite read. Not hostility exactly, assessment, which, she was beginning to notice, appeared to be a Devereux family trait. He said, You told him he wasn't supposed to be walking around in his suit. He wasn't. Celia said nothing for a moment. Then, abruptly, My friend is in room 412. She's been here for 2 weeks and no one has told her family anything useful. I'd like you to look at her chart and tell me honestly what's happening. The director of development looked alarmed. I'm a student, Lena said. I can't. I know what you can and can't do. I'm asking you to look at a chart and tell me, one person to another, what is actually happening. Not the version they give us in the family meetings, the real one. Lena looked at the director. The director looked back at her with an expression that communicated very clearly that she was on her own. She pulled up the chart. She read it carefully. She asked the charge nurse 3 questions. She went back to where Celia was waiting in the hallway, and she told her, clearly and honestly, what the chart said and what it likely meant, and what the family should be asking the attending physician at the next meeting. Celia listened to all of it without interrupting. "Thank you," she said when Lena was done. "You should ask Dr. Falconer specifically about the secondary imaging," Lena said. "He tends to talk around it. Ask him directly." Celia nodded once. Then she said quietly so that only Lena could hear, "My father is careful about who he trusts. He trusted you." She left. Lena went back to her charting and tried to decide how she felt about that. She landed on complicated. It was another 2 weeks before she saw Roman Devereux again. It was not at the hospital. She was at the Granville Island market on a Saturday morning. Because that was where she bought her groceries when she had enough money to make the trip worth it, and enough energy after the week to stand in line. She had a paper bag with kale and sweet potatoes and a wedge of old cheddar, and she was trying to decide if the sourdough loaf was within budget when she became aware of someone standing behind her. She turned. He was in a grey jacket, no tie, which was apparently the most casual she had ever seen him. He looked slightly more human in it, only slightly. "Mr. Devereux! Ims Hartwell." "You're at the market," she said, which was an obvious thing to say, but the alternative was to say nothing, and the silence was doing something strange. "I'm at the market," he agreed. "How's the wound?" "Healed. As you would presumably expect at this point." "Good." She looked at her sourdough, looked back at him. "Did you follow me here?" A pause. "I come here regularly on Saturdays." "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It's not." She bought the sourdough. He fell into step beside her as she moved toward the exit, which was presumptuous, and she let him do it, which was something she was going to have to examine later. They walked along the water for a few minutes without speaking. The market sounds faded behind them. A float plane cut across the grey sky overhead. "Celia told me she spoke to you," he said. "About her friend. She did. She said you were honest with her. I try to be. Most people aren't. With her. Or with me. That seems like a problem you've created," Lena said. He looked at her sharply. She met his eyes. "If the people around you only tell you what you want to hear, that's a structural issue. You've built something that filters out honesty." The silence stretched. "You're remarkably blunt," he said. "You told me on a gurney while you were bleeding to be a very good nursing student. I took that literally." She shifted the grocery bag to her other arm. "Being good at it means being honest even when it's inconvenient. For patients, for families, a beat, for whoever else is in the room." He was quiet for a long moment. They had reached the end of the boardwalk and the water was very close, pewter-colored in the overcast morning. "The fellowship," he said. "Were you accepted?" "I find out in 2 weeks. You'll be accepted." "You don't know that." "I know what I said in the letter. A letter doesn't guarantee anything. I still have to prove I belong there." "I know," he said, and then unexpectedly, "I don't doubt that you will." She looked at him. He was looking at the water, which meant she could see his face without being looked at, and she noticed, for the first time in daylight, without the distraction of blood and emergency, that he was tired. Not physically tired. The other kind. The kind that settles into someone over years and doesn't show except in certain angles. "You should eat breakfast," she said. "You look like you haven't." He turned to look at her. There's a good place about 2 minutes from here. Nothing expensive, good eggs." She held up her grocery bag. "I'm not inviting you. I'm recommending, the same way I'd recommend any patient follow reasonable self-care protocols." The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was something more careful than a smile, like a door that had been locked a long time and was now deciding whether to open. "A recommendation," he said. "Take it or leave it." He fell into step beside her again. She found out about the fellowship not 2 weeks later, but 11 days later, on a Tuesday evening, standing in the hospital stairwell because it was the only place she could take a phone call without feeling like she was being watched. "Doctor." Reyes's voice was warm in a way it had not been in either of their previous conversations. "We'd like to offer you a position," Dr. Reyes said. "We don't often say this directly, but you were the unanimous first choice of the committee." Lena sat down on the stairwell steps. She was in her scrubs, and she had a coffee stain on her left sleeve, and she was 24 years old, and someone had just told her she was the unanimous first choice. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was impressively steady, considering. She sat in the stairwell for 5 minutes after she hung up, not because she was composed, but because she needed to be somewhere small and quiet before she went back out into the world. Then she stood up, straightened her stethoscope, and went back to her patients. She texted him that evening. She had his number because he had given it to her, simply and without comment. The morning they had walked along the water, and he had eaten eggs across from her at a small table and asked her, for the first time, something that was not a business question. She had entered it into her phone under R, Devereaux, and not thought about it, which was a very deliberate way of not thinking about something. "I got the fellowship," she typed. "Wanted to let you know." The response came quickly, for a man she suspected was never without something more pressing to attend to. "I know," he wrote. "Dr. Reyes is an old acquaintance. She called me this afternoon." A pause. Then, "Congratulations, Miss Hartwell. You earned it." She stared at the message for a while. Then she typed, "You realize you're the most indirect person I've ever met." Another pause. "You realize you're the most direct person I've ever met," he replied. And then, after a moment that felt considered, "Have dinner with me," not a recommendation, an actual invitation. She was sitting on her bed in her apartment, with her radiator clicking and her neighbor playing guitar badly, and she was smiling in a way that she hadn't expected and couldn't entirely account for. She typed, "You should know I'm not going to stop telling you when you're wrong." His reply, "I'm counting on it." She thought about the man on the gurney who had looked at her like she was worth looking at. She thought about grey eyes and Granville Island in the early morning, and a door that had been locked a long time, deciding whether to open. She thought about what it meant to be very good at something, and what it cost and when it became worth it. She typed, "Thursday works." Outside, the rain started. The particular Vancouver rain that was more mist than rain, that settled over the city like something gentle and inevitable. Lena put her phone down and looked out the window, and listened to her neighbor play the same chord wrong for the 3rd time, and she thought, this is how things change. Not loudly, not all at once. Just a door, opening,